a third video. Now, before I get into the main topic of this video, I want to first make a couple more points about the last two videos that I forgot to mention. First off is when I was talking about our basic rights, and I mentioned that when you take away somebody else's rights, when you kill someone or otherwise violate the rights, and how you'll lose your rights by doing that, I will also want to clarify that is what allows us to kill people in self-defense. That when somebody is trying to take away your right, they have voided their own right to life, and therefore self-defense using lethal force is the right course of action. And the second thing I wanted to mention for the second video about the process of crime is I also want to mention that when I mentioned high risk reward and why criminals don't attack police officers and so on, I also want to mention that is the reason that muggers and store robbers and so on typically do not kill the person flat out. From a logical perspective, it will be much easier for a criminal to just kill you and then take what they want. It is the best way to accomplish your goal. The reason they don't do that is because they understand that killing someone is a much more severe thing than just assaulting someone or robbing someone. So they still understand in the back of their head that even though they're committing a crime and they may be caught, they're still trying to get away with as much as possible while posing the least amount of risk to themselves. So by not killing you, if they don't have to, that does not mean they won't, but by not killing you, they try to lessen their possible sentence time. So those are the 2 points that I wanted to make. Now on to this video itself. What I want to talk about is, in the last video I talked about the process of crime, and I started to get into why we need weapons to be capable of dealing with these types of crimes. So what can we do to protect ourselves and utilize self-defense? We can use unarmed combat, or we can use weaponry. And we need to decide what's effective and why we need guns at all, as opposed to something else, say martial arts. Now, what I mentioned is, remember, criminals use surprise. Surprise is not an issue at the moment when we're talking about arming ourselves. They do use superior firepower, superior force, which is achieved either through the use of a weapon or numbers, and also possibly body mass. When I mentioned that they look for easy targets, if I'm a 200-pound guy of solid muscle, obviously an easy target is a small guy or a woman who weighs, say, 110 pounds, right? It is much easier for them to overpower smaller people who may be physically weaker, or older people. Even these guys do break into houses where there are senior citizens, people who are in their 80s, in their 90s, people who may be in wheelchairs, people who may be crippled. So they do have that advantage, and now we need to address what kind of self-defense tactic for self-defense capability do we have available to us that is universal, that a woman, an old man, a small person, a weak person, a crippled person, a sick person can use against a person who has a weapon, who may have multiple criminals, and who may be stronger, and who may be more proficient in hand-to-hand combat. And criminals typically are. They based on the way of their way of life, they will be more fit than the average American civilian today. They need to know how to run, they need to know how to fight, they need to be stronger. It's what they do, and they are good at it for that reason. So what I just mentioned is, what is that one thing that we can look at that lets us neutralize their advantages? As the situation exists today, the answer is a firearm. So let me look at martial arts, just step by step. I am not a very proficient martial artist. I am not a badass kung fu ninja. I know a lot of techniques. I've practiced a lot of martial arts. I've read about them. But I don't have a lot of hand-to-hand experience. I don't spar. Which means that pretty much anybody could throw a punch at me and they'd connect. I don't have that mental processing and reflexes to block and everything else. So, let's say I did. Let's say I spent years practicing and fighting, and I'm a great fighter. So I'm confident that I can take out anybody who's trying to actually attack me hand to hand. What happens when they pull out a knife, or say a bludgeon, a brick, a pipe, and what happens when there's more than one of them and they both armed with melee weapons? Like I've said several times already, and I will repeat, unarmed combat against a knife is suicidal. As much as popular culture would have us believe, it is not possible. And I did do videos to explain that. So no matter how good I am at martial arts, if they're armed or there's multiple opponents, my martial arts are now useless. Less lethal weapons, pepper spray, mace, stun guns, tasers. No, tasers are regulated today. Stun guns are okay. So stun guns, mace, things like that. Maybe a kubaton, which is a bludgeon that is designed to incapacitate and not kill, which is pretty much like a small club. So how effective are those? Well, let's see. Mace and pepper spray are not actually very effective. In boot camp, I did undergo the gas chamber, where I was exposed to CS gas, tear gas. Tear gas and mace and pepper spray are not the same thing. There's pepper spray has OC, I can't pronounce it, it's oleo raisin capsaicin, something like that. And CS is tongue twister moment, chlorobenzomylnitrile. I remembered that just so I could show off. Now, they are different things. They do have slightly different effects, but ultimately they fall into the same category. They're an irritant. They cause mucous membrane irritation. They cause some pain, but it is fake pain. I'll talk about it in a little bit. They do cause some pain. They can cause blindness temporarily and disorientate the attacker. So it seems like they would be quite effective. At least it seems that way on paper. Now, from my experience with CS, it is not crippling. CS gas, and note, I was in a room with tear gas, not a wide open ventilated area, and I did inhale that full force. I took full breaths, and I was exposed to that without a gas mask for about a minute. Now, it hurt, and it was uncomfortable, and it sucked, but it in no way incapacitated me. I was still standing, I could still see, I could still talk. All I had to do, it was just plain old mental willpower. If you just stand there, and I had no choice but to stand there, it didn't do anything to actually stop me. I'm a healthy guy. I don't have any lung ailments. I just breathed it in. It hurt, but I was still breathing, no problem. I had mucus dripping over me, but no problem. I was not incapacitated or stopped. I've never been pepper sprayed, so I don't know if that would be much more effective. But the point I'm making here is that less lethal weapons do not necessarily stop anybody. If a person has that willpower, a less lethal weapon, which pretty much is the threat of pain and discomfort, will not necessarily stop them. Now, it can be a very effective weapon, an alternative to lethal force. If you pepper spray a guy in the face, and for that moment he's covering up his eyes, then you can run or hit him or whatever else and continue. Now, but what happens when he's got a gun? Or, again, there's more than one of them. Or what happens when he's already right on you and he's got the knife to your throat or anything else, or he's strangling you? The thing is, at that moment, when he's already closed in, even if you pepper spray him, he's already on you. Knife to throat, hands on throat, gun to head. So even if you pepper spray him and blind him, all he has to do is, whether he can see or not, stab, cut, shoot. It's done. It's not going to stop the guy. So less lethal weapons like pepper spray and mace are good alternatives to some situations that do not facilitate the use of lethal force. But are they perfect weapons for self-defense? Do they put us on the same capability as the attacker, especially when dealing with multiple opponents? They do not. Stun guns. Same thing. If you have multiple opponents, what happens, you say you just hit one guy with a stun gun, the moment you do that, the next guy's on you, hits you in the head, you go down. Or if they've got knives, again, stun gun versus knife, you're screwed. And stun gun versus firearm, you're screwed. So that's pretty much all out of the question. So what are we left with that can counter lethal force? And that is lethal force itself. And so now we get into knives for self-defense. In my opinion, knives are utterly useless for self-defense, and always have been and always will be, for two reasons. First off is the legality of using it. A knife is a lethal weapon. It is just as dangerous as a firearm. So using a knife constitutes using a firearm. It is the same requirements. And those requirements pretty much boil down to the fact that you are being attacked with lethal force. So legally speaking, I cannot whip out a pocket knife because some guy punched me in the face. That's like getting punched and whipping out a pistol. It doesn't work that way. I cannot respond with lethal force to just an attack. Now, if he's using lethal force, a knife is useless against that too. I cannot stop a guy with a gun if I have a knife. And if he has a knife, I also can't stop him. Knife on knife doesn't work. It's a stalemate. If either one of us attacks, that guy will get stabbed. It's done. Now, that can be effective. Because knife on knife deterrent, if he understands what's happening there, he can't attack you, you can't attack him, you take that opportunity to just brandish it and get the hell out of dodge. So a knife can be effective as a deterrent against melee weapons. But again, now it boils back down to them having firearms. And of course, multiple attackers. Now typically when you're fighting back with something like say a knife, I doubt that the average mugger who doesn't have a gun would continue to try and engage you. They'd probably just go away because they understand that they're screwed. It's now an altercation. They're not having an easy day. So knives would be effective self-defense tools against lethal force that is presented in a melee weapon. Now we got to deal with guns. We cannot defend ourselves against guns with anything of what I've just talked about. Less lethal force doesn't work. Lethal force in the form of a knife doesn't work. So what are we left with to deal with firearms threats? And the answer is, of course, another gun. And when I was talking also about less lethal force and knives and unarmed combat, I have to again reiterate that not all civilians are capable of using knives or hand-to-hand combat. Old people, injured people, sick people, physically weak people, small people, versus big guys, multiple guys. So that leaves us with just one weapon that is an equalizer, that totally levels the playing field, and that is, of course, the firearm. The firearm can be used by anybody, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. It is bad because criminals can use that effectively despite having no training or understanding of proper firearm technique. It's available to that skill set. They don't need it. They can still use it. But on the flip side, all their advantages that they can have that we may not as civilians are also neutralized by the firearm. If they have numbers, firearm works against numbers too. If they have body weight, muscle mass, firearm takes care of that as well. If it doesn't matter if I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger or a 90-pound teenage girl. Of course, teenagers can't carry guns, but just for sake of principle, it doesn't matter who the person is. The firearm is still just as effective in their hands. And that is why firearms are the greatest self-defense tool against lethal force, because they remove advantages and they equalize the playing field. So any civilian can defend themselves with a firearm with proper training and understanding of how to use it. So I think that pretty solidly establishes the case for owning firearms for self-defense, because without firearms, civilians do have, criminals do have all those advantages that we cannot deal back with. And remember, if we do not have the capability to defend ourselves, then we may as well not have the right to self-defense at all. The capability to defend yourself is a right. And given that firearms are the only option we have to effectively defend ourselves against the various criminal elements, the ownership of a firearm for self-defense is a right. And the Supreme Court has ruled that the right to own firearms is an innate right, just like the right to life, liberty, and property. You are born with it. The Second Amendment, according to that Supreme Court ruling I will list it below, does not grant you the right to bear arms. It ensures that it will not be infringed upon. You already have the right without the Second Amendment. It is innate. It is implied. I will post that ruling down below. So hopefully that establishes the case for owning any firearm at all for the purpose of self-defense. Now we need to what we're going to have to get into now is the issues of different types of firearms and regulating them. Should we have access to any kind of weapon? Should we have access to grenades, rocket launchers, landmines, and the assault rifles, the machine guns, armor-piercing ammo, all those issues? And we need to determine, can we have all of them or not? And when we make a decision on that, we need to figure out how to regulate them. What is okay to have, what is not. And I will address that in the next video. So hopefully in this video I have determined that the right to bear arms makes sense for self-defense, as in firearms whatsoever, no matter what kind of gun it is, and that it is indeed a right. And if you want me to continue to clarify on this or have questions about this, by all means comment. Thank you.